Hi everybody, this is Shane R. Monroe and I am back with another Game Boy flashing device, this time called the GBxCart. The GBxCart is sort of similar to this GBOperator, and if you haven't seen that video, I recommend you go up there and click that link and watch my full review about the GBOperator, as I'm going to compare and contrast these, but I'm going to assume you've already seen this video, and we're mostly going to be talking about the GBxCart. So these devices are similar in purpose, but they do have some very distinct differences that as the end user you should probably know about. Now, these are flash cartridges that I have in the back here. We're going to kind of set those to the side. And here we have a variety of Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and of course Game Boy Advance games. And this device here, the GBOperator, is really designed to be a turnkey, easy to use solution for doing emulation. You can see I can just pop the guy in and I can go over to the interface and simply click launch and the game starts playing. It's really that simple. So this is more the consummate player's version of this type of a cartridge. In other words, I just want to play the game. I want to transfer my saves back and forth. This is really pretty much the quickest, easiest, and best solution if you're just looking to enjoy a little bit of emulation right here on your computer in a very easy plug-and-play type system. You can see the interface over here for the GBOperator is very much designed for the layperson. It's designed specifically not to be complicated. Plugging in a game gives you an immediate look at what the game might be. You can hop over to data and download this game ROM by clicking a button. Very, very simple stuff. You can upload if this was a writable cartridge, you could write to it. You could download the save file if there was one. In the case of Pokemon, you could download the save and upload your save. So I could protect myself against the battery dying in one of these things. So this tool is really all about the reading, but it also does some writing too. This guy, let's take a closer look, shall we? Now, this is the GBxCart. And you can see that I've got it currently inside this this plastic case. It's actually kind of dirty. I'll get comments. So this little guy, you know what? Let's go ahead and take this off. So this cart, as delivered, comes with a extra case, and it comes with this board and a connector slot. So there's really not much to see here, honestly. There is a little push button right here. It's very difficult to see that, but I'll try to get you a close-up view without it freaking out. It's just not going to happen. There's a little button right here. You hold that to start a flashing process, and you have a USB-C connector, and of course you have where you would put the cartridge. All right, so that's pretty much it. It's a very simple device, not quite as simple as the GBOperator, mind you, but still, this is something that you could deal with. Now, I'm a little freaked out about touching, as I'm doing it, I'm weird and freaked out about touching open circuit boards, things like that. So that's why there's a case. Now, you do have to modify the case. This is just a standard Game Boy Advance cartridge case, and essentially you have to cut yourself out a place for the USB, and of course, if you like, drill a little hole in the front to allow you to access the flash. So let's put this guy back together. Okay, so now that we have it all back together, it's a little safer for playing around with, in my opinion. Let's discuss how this varies. The first thing that we need to do, now that we've looked at the physical characteristics, whereas this guy was really just sort of a plain and simple solution, this guy's a little bit more complicated, but not too much more. And of course, in order to take cartridges on and off, you sort of have to pick the unit up to do so, where this is sort of more of a console type solution. So for physical characteristics, we're not looking at a whole bunch of difference, but where we really start talking about differences are how this behaves when you are actually using the interface. So I'm going to go ahead and plug it in. You see little LEDs, power, you see some read-write type stuff going on here, and we'll look more at that in just a minute. And I'm going to go ahead and just plug Dragon's Lair into this guy. All right. So let's now move ourselves to the interface. So we've already looked at the epilogue GBOperator interface, and let's be honest, it's simple, it's clean, but it doesn't give you a ton of options. Immediately when you come over to the FlashGBX software, which is free of course, and when you run it, it will spawn a window that gives you other information, including the GitHub, where you can get access to the open source software. It'll also tell you some interesting things about whether you're using the latest version. It will also tell you some other neat things, like if your battery is dead. And we're going to look at that more in just a minute. But let's turn our attentions back to the GBX Flash software. So right now, we've really done nothing more than we've got the cartridge connected. By the way, this did not require any installation of a driver of any kind. I plugged it in and it was good to go. And you see that it does read the cart, so it's here, but we don't see any cartridge information. That's because we need to choose an option. So we're going to go into Gameboy mode. Now you can see we do indeed see some information about the title, which sort of includes a English-friendly name, whether there's support for Super Game Boy. Now, obviously, these are all sort of database-driven, maybe the checksum. Some of these things are maybe derived by reaching out to the cartridge, but there's a lot of, let's say, not as user-friendly data here. Now, some people are definitely going to want to see exactly what this information is, and it is important to some people. For the end user who's just looking to rip and maybe play the game inside of the GBA emulator down here, perhaps that's a little bit overkill. But you don't have to pay a whole lot of attention to that. You can instead simply go over here and back up the ROM or write a new ROM. In this case, that's not a writable cartridge, so it's not going to work. You can erase cartridge save data if it was there. In this case, there is no save data. Let's do this instead. Let's move over to Pokemon, where maybe we have a few more options here. There we go. Now you see we have identification of the save type, which is very useful. This SRAM is useful for understanding how this particular product may save. That means there's a battery in here, and that battery is prone to failure over time. Right, so I could back up my save data very quickly. Right there. Now my cartridge backup is safe. So for whatever reason I lost that battery, I could replace the battery and then restore the data. It's all pretty quick and easy. You can also erase that save data area. Right? And that way, if you wanted to loan the cart to a friend, they don't get your backups. And then, of course, you can always write the save data again from your original backup. Sweet. Pretty straightforward, pretty easy. Again, interface isn't quite as nice, but for the most part, this is pretty straightforward. Backing up the ROM, of course, is pretty simple. I've already done this a couple of times, so let me go ahead and back up another one. So you can see the transfer speed, it's humming along, and I'm going to show you some actual speed comparisons between these two devices, because you might be amazed at the difference and disparity between these two devices, which seem to be doing the exact same thing. So you can see we're still backing up here. Your backup time is starting to get up to the 30-second mark in here. All right, so about 28 seconds. Now, we're not going to do a full-blown comparison. I've got some stats I'm going to show you later, but if I throw the Pokemon cartridge in here and I do a download of the game, again, I've already got some of this stuff here. Let's go ahead and save it. Yeah, that was a whole ton faster than the GBxCart was, right? Yeah, a lot faster. And the bigger the cartridge, of course, the more time you're going to save. So, for the sake of brevity, what we're talking about here is the GBOperator, much faster to read, the GBxCart, much faster to write. So if you're going to spend a lot of time reading cartridges and then using a dedicated type emulator instead of this guy, you may want to stick with the GBOperator, because the speed is simply, it's obvious that they focused on read speed as part of this equation versus the write speed of the GBxCart. And again, I'm going to share those speed numbers with you in just a moment. So this is really it. I mean, so for the purposes of the GBxCart, you're really backing up the ROM or writing a ROM to a flash cartridge. You're backing up your save or you're writing it back. I mean, that's what this is for. And of course, there is an album viewer. Unfortunately, I sent the camera back that was generously loaned to me by Chris Henschel. Check out his channel as well. I'll leave a link in the description. A firmware updater, which it works pretty well, and you will be alerted, as I mentioned earlier, if there is a firmware update. You will get an alert in this window talking about the latest version, whether it's available or not, and whether you've got the latest version. And when you do install a new firmware, that's where that little tiny button on here comes into play. To put it in write mode, you'll have to hold that button down for a couple of seconds. Unfortunately, I did not record myself updating it. It did not come with the latest version when I got it from the distributor. Of course, there'll be a link to the distributor in the description. Unfortunately, I did have to upgrade it, but it was pretty simple, pretty fast, and fairly straightforward. So if that's it, if both of these serve a similar purpose, which is to download game ROMs from original cartridges or write to these flash cartridges, right? And so I have a couple of different cartridges here, and I've got definitely some stuff to talk about here. Let me go ahead and open these guys up while I'm talking. Some of these cases can be really difficult to open, including this guy. Right, so I've got a couple of different cases here, cartridges, flash cartridges. And I'm going to just bring these guys out. Getting all cluttered here. So I've got a handful of these to show you. Some of these I already showed you when I was looking at the GBOperator itself. So what we have here is sort of the quad essential formula for backing up and playing or flashing Game Boy and Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance games. So what we have here are two different cartridges. One is a 2 megabyte cartridge of Game Boy and a 4 megabyte cartridge for Game Boy. The 2 megabyte cartridge is going to be fine for most of our Game Boy games, including Pokemon here. But if you wanted to, say, restore Dragon's Lair to a flash cartridge, you'll need something a little bigger, which is 4 megabytes. Now, there are some situations where you'll want to use one over the other, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. And now, for the Game Boy Advance folks, this is really important. First off, let me explain that I could not get the Game Boy Advance flash cartridges to be seen properly in the GBOperator. I could plug them in, and you might see what's on there, but it doesn't. It's just I couldn't flash to this. It just did not work. I think this one actually did flash. No, this one doesn't even get seen. So I guess if GBA, if Game Boy Advance stuff is your jam, you might, it'll play just fine, right? I can plug this guy in and we can play Pac-Man. To play or read Game Boy Advance cartridges, this is your guy. Well, either one of them could be your guy. Unfortunately, if you want to write to one of them, this is out the door currently until they get some updates in terms of writing to the different types of flash cartridges. And this is your guy, right? Because this writes to the GB flash cartridges great. So that might be a deciding factor for you. So let's take a look, and I promised you to look at the speeds. So let's take a look at that, shall we? Here is the data that I have for you regarding the reading and write speeds of these cartridges. So let's go over these together. I did 2 Game Boy or Game Boy Color games, and I did 3 GBA games. These are the sizes of the titles as well as their type of save, right? Which is SRAM here and SRAM down here. So read speeds. Clearly the definitive winner here is the GBOperator, right? So I did each read twice just to make sure that there was nothing hokey going on. And you can see Dragon's Lair at 4 megabytes ran at 14 seconds to read. Jumping over to the GBxCart, it took over a minute and a half to read that cartridge. Now, I did use the exact same port, USB 3.0 port, and I used the exact same cable to make sure I didn't skew the results. Pokemon Red read at a fast 4 seconds, 20 plus seconds on the GBxCart. The Cartoon Network Collection, these are gigantic cartridges, 32 megabytes because it's got a whole bunch of compressed video on it. That took 1 minute and 16 seconds to read on the GBO. I only read it once on the GBX at 30 minutes it took to read that cartridge. That's like 20-something times the difference, right? 28 times the difference. I didn't do the math. 10 seconds to read the Pac-Man collection, where it took 4 minutes and 22 seconds. Obviously, reading off of GBA is even slower for the GBxCart. 19 seconds for WarioWare Inc. and 7 minutes and 10 seconds for the GBX. So if you're doing a lot of reading, you're going to save a buttload of time by using the GBOperator over the GBX. So let's talk about write speeds, right? So while GBO was the clear reading winner, let's talk about writing, which definitely shows a completely different tale. So writing on the GBX, Dragon's Lair, remember this is a 4 megabyte cartridge. This is the only one I can test, obviously, because you can't write 4 megabytes on 2. It clocks in at 2 minutes and 22 seconds. Conversely, on the GBO, it took 5 minutes and 41 seconds. An unbelievable difference in terms of speed. You're talking about double. So writing a cartridge, a lot slower. Writing Pokemon Red on the GBxCart, 34 to 43 seconds, depending on which size of cart. And of course, there's more to erase on these cartridges, right? So it's a little bit longer. And on the GBO, you went from anywhere from 48 seconds, which is kind of on par with the GBX, up to 1 minute 56 seconds on the 4 megabyte cartridge. And you can see the numbers here. This, obviously, there was no way for me to actually write these on the GBOperator because the flash carts weren't recognized or simply wouldn't write correctly. So we take a look at the Cartoon Network collection, which took 30 minutes to read, only took 14 minutes to write. Now, I don't know how that is. I don't understand why it's faster to write than to read, but I'm telling you, I've got valid data here. On the Pac-Man collection, we wrote at 1 minute 47 seconds, where we took considerably longer to read. And of course, we wrote WarioWare to a GBA cartridge, flash cartridge, in 3 minutes and 34 seconds. So it's really important to understand that there are trade-offs between these two devices. Reading is obviously faster here, writing is faster here. No GBA Flashcart support here, GBA Flashcart support here. So there's a couple of other things that we really need to discuss from a differential here. Let me get rid of those numbers. So one of the things, if you watched my other videos, you realize that the GBOperator was incorrectly identifying my 2 megabyte cartridge. It's so hard to get back into megabytes these days. A 2 megabyte cartridge was being identified as 4 megabytes, which was causing a write of, say, Dragon's Lair to fail. Now, I got a 4 megabyte cartridge, and the GBOperator sees this 4 megabyte cartridge as 2 megabytes. It sees this one as 4 and this one as 2. However, it doesn't prevent you from trying to write to either one. So while it is inconvenient that it misidentifies them, it doesn't really stop you from getting the operation done. Let's talk about the GBX cart versus these two types of GBA. I promised I'd explain that there's two differences here between these cartridges. Well, there's one big one. One is this is a battery backed up SRAM type save. This one is an EEPROM or flash type save. Different games require a different type of cartridge. So if you have something that is battery backed up, you will need to be using an SRAM type Game Boy Advance flash cart. Or sometimes you can still write the game and it will just crap out and say that the save area is bad and it just won't save your game, but you can continue to playing. Other times, however, it'll just say save is corrupt and goodbye. On the other hand, of course, if you try to write a Game Boy ROM that uses a flash type memory, and you write that here, you'll have a problem. Likewise, if you write an SRAM save type game into the flash version, it may not error out at all, but your save just won't be there. Now, you're probably saying to yourself, Shane, we know in the Game Boy Advance community, there are people who have patched these different types of game ROMs to work in one type of save or the other. Absolutely true. I'm looking at this holistically as I read it from here and I'm writing it, well, in this case, I read it from here and I'm writing it to there. Yes, there are patched ROM scenarios that might get you around some of the limitations. But if you are simply trying to be as righteous as possible, and I own this game, but I want to have this locked up because it's suddenly worth $500 to some millennial somewhere, and I'm sure I'll get hate mail for saying that, I would rather just carry a cheap flash cartridge around with me. So there are numerous reasons, but suffice to say that if you are attempting to keep yourself completely legit, you're probably going to need to have one of each. Meanwhile, there's only one deal here. It either has a save battery or it does not, so you can pretty much mix and match these cartridges. These guys, on the other hand, you cannot. So let's talk about one more thing to wrap this video up that's very, very important, is the GBOperator, again, is more turnkey. When I put this flash cartridge in and I go to write a game to it, so let's take a look at what happens. So I plugged this 4 megabyte cartridge in that already has Dragon's Lair on it. I'm going to just go ahead and try to upload Dragon's Lair again to it so you can see what it does. It says, hey, your file's too large. You have selected a 4 megabyte file, but the memory on the device is reported as 2 megabytes. Now, I could totally go back and write this and do it anyway, just as I was saying. But there's no discussion as to what type of cartridge I have. There's no type. This is a memory chip, umpty squat, bibbity boop, right? So there's none of that in here. It is turnkey and invisible, and a lot of times it seems to be fairly accurate in terms of what it's able to do. But let's talk about moving over to the GBxCart. So if I read the information from here, it does say that it's Dragon's Lair, right? But it does list this as a generic ROM cartridge. Let's say I was going to go ahead and write. All right, so the first thing we see is, would you like to attempt to auto-detect the flash cartridge type? Obviously, genuine cartridges can't be rewritten, and reproduction cartridges often use 3.3 volts. Actual flash cartridges may require 5. I know this is an actual flash cartridge, so I'm just going to go ahead and remove that. But, whoa, hey, now I'm starting, what is this? Cartridge responds to flash commands used by... All right, so a compatible entry from this list will now be auto-selected. Support ROM sizes up to 4 megabytes. Well, it definitely identifies that correctly. That's something, right? Okay. So you can run this flash chip query, which maybe that offers something to somebody. Doesn't help me at all, but I'm glad that it's there for those who might need it. And then we choose the ROM that we want to write. As you know, Dragon's Lair takes a while, so I'm not going to do that one. But you'll also notice that it picked one of the entries from the Flashcart dropdown, which doesn't really compute, right? I mean, you can see the information. If I look at the dropdown, there's a right? It's really, really difficult to try to make a decision as to what card I should be using. It's like, well, Shane, just let them pick for you. They chose one for you, just use that. And yes, this works like 90% of the time. Unfortunately, there were times when using the Game Boy Advance cartridges that I had to actually go and pick a different one, and it was not an easy selection. I had to try multiple different items from the drop-down from the compatible list. Now, mind you, they don't filter on the compatible list. They're just showing all of them to you. Did you see Bung Doctor on that list? Neither did I, right? So if I auto-detect, right, these are the ones it says I should pick from. That's a lot to pick from. And in reality, the one that it defaults to wasn't necessarily the one that I needed for the time for that particular one. And it was, I believe, writing to the GBA SRAM, I should have made better notes. So what these values tend to correspond to are the chip types that are on the cartridge, which is great if it's see-through. Well, even so, I don't think you can really see anything on there. You can kind of make out the numbers on the chips maybe through here. But the bottom line is, you're probably going to have to open these cartridges up and get the numbers off. I'm going to provide you with some pictures now of some of these cartridges from the inside, so you can see these this nomenclature that are on the chips themselves. And in some cases, the chipset itself is not even found. There were many cases where the chip type was not the same. So let me show you here real quick. So I'm going to change over to Game Boy Advance. I'm going to get warned not to do it with the power on. And then I'm going to go ahead and auto-detect the cartridge. And I got 3 this time, so that's pretty easy. Just try them all until you get one right. The funny part is they all work, or they seem to work, until you get to the point to where it tried to access the save. And I think it was Yoshi's Island or something, where, or Super Mario, or Mario Kart Circuit. One of those games, I had to write it with a very specific one, and I want to say that it was with the second one in the list. Your mileage is going to vary depending on where you got your cartridge. But my point is, it is not always easy plug and play, and you might have to open these cartridges up and find out what chips they are. In my case, none of these match my chip type. Mine is an M36 LOT type chip. However, these commands, at least in one of the subsets, actually worked. What's my point? All of this technical jargon nonsense, what does that mean? It means that while this guy is definitely the more power tool version, and yes, if you want to write GBA carts, you don't have any choice. This is your guy, that is not. However, my point is that this is not as turnkey as the GBOperator. Your needs may say, gosh, listen, I just want to plug a cartridge in and play it, man. That's all I want to do. Yeah, I want to back it up and put it on a you know, a Gameboy SD card based flash thing. So I'm going to use my own ROMs because I'm a good guy. I'm not a dirty, filthy pirate. So I'm going to download the ROMs that I already own on cartridge using this guy so I can play it on a multi-game flash cart. This is probably going to be the better choice. Your situation is going to dictate which of these devices is for you. If all you're interested in doing is playing games, this is your guy. If you're interested in flashing Game Boy games, this is probably your guy. However, if you are interested in the more lower level read-write operations and you don't care about built-in emulation, then this is your guy. And when I say built-in emulation, as we showed before, it's very easy to drop a cartridge in, hit launch, and you're playing the game. I know what you're thinking, well, Shane, you could just do it on a Game Boy emulator. That is true, but it's definitely not as easy. In this case, the action of downloading the Pac-Man collection to your hard drive, which of course it does before it starts the emulator, is transparent to the end user, right? I hit launch and you might see something that says reading game, and then it's done. And then it plays the game. In this case, I've already launched this game like 150 times, so you're not going to see that. But it is still turnkey. And yes, you could go to the storage location of the Epilogue operator and open that file inside of MGBA or your other favorite emulator. But really, I mean, like turnkey, bing, bang, boom. Now, you'll also notice that things like emulator settings, device settings, you can use a gamepad and you can use the keyboard. And you can reconfigure the gamepad controls. So yes, there is some configuration in here, but not a lot. Obviously, and by the way, this emulator is based on this emulator. So this is the core that it's being used for the emulation. But obviously, all of the emulation options that you have here, right? All of these things are simply not available over here. However, either device will let you download the ROMs and then you can play it in whatever emulator you want. But it really is cool. Listen, I'm telling you, it is so cool to be able to just grab, plug it in and hit launch and call it a day and just start playing versus having to read the cartridge off, then go over here, load the ROM, right? But in the end, you're kind of getting the same thing, right? It's the same end result, it's just a different way of getting there. You will have to decide what works best for you. From a cost point of view, they're the same cost. They're about 50 bucks. You'll still have to probably wait. You're not going to be able to get one of these on Amazon, for example. You will have to order from another location, and I will provide links to Flashcarts, this guy, that guy. They'll all be down in the description below. So from a cost perspective, you're pretty much on board. I do think this looks nicer. It's sleeker. It's more of an end user scenario, but you got to have both, right? Because I want to write flash cartridges for my GBA. So in that case, I have to have both. When I'm in user mode, I'm going to use this guy. When I am in dump write and utility mode, I will be using the GBxCart. Oh, there was one more thing. Before we head out, there was one more thing I wanted to show you, which I think is really cool. It's definitely something to put in the plus column over here. If I take these cartridges out, and I put in WarioWare Twisted, right, which you obviously can't play because, well, it's got an accelerometer in here, and frankly, you can't even pick this up and move it to play. It doesn't work, which is too bad. That'd be kind of cool. You're told that it's a read-only cartridge. It's an official cartridge. I don't know why there's no picture. And you could launch it. Now, notice, see how it's loading the game? I've never dumped it and played it in here. So the first run of the game, it is actually dumping the ROM to the hard drive right now, which means I could open it here. And guess what? It might work in here if you can emulate, I can't remember if you can emulate the sensor for that or not. But anyway, that's outside the scope. Wow, this takes quite a bit of time. Again, first run, and I'll prove it to you. It's just the first run. And by the way, they hide these pretty well where the GBOperator stores the ROMs. Again, I think they're trying to sort of escape the concept of accountability sort of for piracy, right? So let's go ahead and get that. Now you'll also notice that it's going to ask if you want to overwrite the current save to your cartridge. I'm going to go ahead and discard that. So one of the things about this being a player's toy is that you can play on your local device, right? You can play on your actual handheld, save your game, then come here and it will grab your save magically and drop it in there. And when you're done playing, it will update the save. That's great. That's not something you get with a GBX. That's not something you get by using this emulator native. So that's in the plus column. However, if we take WarioWare Twisted and we put it into the GBX, and I hit, go back to Game Boy, and I hit read information, it does say WarioWare Twisted, blah, blah, blah. It is a SRAM type save, so it does have a battery in there, which you can kind of see. But if you open this guy up, hey now, it seems that this cartridge's real-time clock battery is no longer functional and may need to be replaced. Wow, that's actually a really neat feature, and I'm kind of shocked that the Epilogue operator doesn't have that in there. And to me, this shouldn't be hidden behind, you know, a console window. This should be up here somewhere. I need to see that, like right next to save type. Put a little red asterisk, you click on that, and maybe it opens this window up and says, hey, battery's low. So this is really cool. This not only helps you identify what type of save it is, but it also tells you if that save is still functional, which this one apparently is not. Well, listen, we could sit and talk all day about this. I could play games, I could do all that good stuff, but I think you have enough information about this guy versus this guy and what might suit your needs best. Obviously, if you have questions, please post comments. I will respond to each and every one, and I will answer it as best as I can. If you have other information that maybe I missed about these guys that would be useful for people to understand, I really appreciate you bringing that to my attention so I can do some sort of a retraction. And as always, I appreciate you guys watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. I've been having a good time revisiting these collections. A lot of this stuff I had, and I've had for a long time. Huge fan of a lot of these games, and it's really neat to be able to sort of breathe new life into them in a fun and unusual way. I'm Shane R. Monroe, and as always, thanks so much for listening, and of course, take care.